Hello, my name is Dr. Luis Martinez, and I'm the Director for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Trinity University. We're thrilled that you're going to be joining us today for a one-hour conversation exploring the issues of resiliency and sustainability for businesses and small startups here in Bexar County during the pandemic. I am thrilled to be joined in a roundtable conversation today by David Marquez, the Executive Director of Bexar County's Economic and Community Development, Roger Garcia, the Vice President for Business Retention and Expansion for the San Antonio Economic Development Foundation, Trinity University's Dean of the School of Business, Robert Scherer, and an entrepreneur, former Trinity student, founder of QuickSip Coffee, Jacob Hurl-Zaneman, who'll be joining us today. Our goal for today's conversation is to have a roundtable conversation, really exploring the issues of how companies and startups have sort of grown resiliency over the last 13 months and sort of what their path forward is moving forward. We're thrilled to have here some of the key players who've been a part of building that kind of ecosystem here in San Antonio for the last year and have an opportunity for them to highlight the work that they've done. You have the opportunity to participate as well. Please feel free to go ahead and send us questions or comments in the chat. We'll be looking for opportunities to incorporate those through the course of today's conversation. So please, by all means, please include your questions or comments in the chat. If you are going to be viewing this webcast on our YouTube channel prior to its live broadcast, we look forward to engaging you asynchronously. Feel free to email at lmartin6@trinity.edu for further conversation with our guest speakers and for our further conversation. So as we mentioned, the world today looks very different than it was a year ago. I mean, if we think about the transition, the remarkable transition that's happened in the last 12 months, 12 months ago at this time in April, we were in our first lockdowns. We were seeing a huge shedding of the workforce here in San Antonio, primarily because of its sort of emphasis around hospitality and tourism. We saw global supply chains getting frozen. We saw sort of this cataclysmic kind of uncertainty of the hospitals getting filled, of our healthcare system being strained, of no cure for this vaccine, no cure for this pandemic, no viable treatments, a lot of unknowns with regards to what the business climate looked like, what the healthcare climate looked like. And accordingly, there was this huge shift that happened a year ago. David, starting with you, what did you initially begin to see at the county as we started this transition a year ago?
Well, thanks, Luis. I appreciate it very much. The county, is a public operation. We cannot shut down, although a lot of our functions did go to virtual. In my department, I also, amongst other things, oversee a utility assistance program. And we've had an opening, functioning front window the entire time. Sometimes we were outside under a shade structure, and sometimes we were inside in a hallway. To try to keep folks out of our building. My offices are on the 4th floor of the building, and so the elevators were another touch point of potential infection. But I really was impressed with my team, the way they came together to create new processes and to innovate. We bought some walkie-talkies. We were able to help keep people moving that way. Lots of plexiglass like everyone else. Across the county, of course, we stay in business. We're government. We have an obligation to be in business during a crisis. It gives people a sense of confidence to be in business. And that was very important to Judge Wolf and the Commissioner's Court. But we did go to a lot of work from home like everyone else. And as much as possible, our county manager encouraged everyone who could possibly work from home to do so. Because as you know, we also provide oversight to the university health system. Oh, yeah. So we were able to, see that potential risk of overloading the system. And we also oversee the jail, which we just couldn't very well let people, incarcerate from home. You have to stay in the largest hotel in downtown San Antonio, the Bexar County Jail. So those proved to be challenges that we, I think, pivoted very quickly to overcome very well.
Yeah, and Roger, from your position at the SADF, you guys were recruiting companies to come into San Antonio. There's no more flights in and out of San Antonio anymore. Your ability to be able to recruit those companies as well as support the companies that had recently relocated. What did things look like for you a year ago at the SADF?
Okay. First of all, thank you for having us. And really, I think the term that you use for this particular conversation, resiliency, is very key to what we saw last year.
Yeah.
And I would further add resiliency and adaptability. So those are the two key drivers that we saw and what we did. So overall, immediately, back over a year ago when things started to really heat up a bit, we had, for 2020, we had some great plans. We had the regional economic strategy ready to go. We were going to execute it. We already had the dates, everything set to go. Pandemic hits. So we, quickly adapted and pivoted to taking care and looking at, response and recovery of our local industry. So in my role under business retention and expansion, that's primarily what that is. So when we look at economic development, it's a two-sided coin. On the one side, the more traditional process is business recruitment that everybody is familiar with. But the other side of it is our taking care of our local market to really make sure that, those growth opportunities are there. Workforce, is being met, pipeline of workforce, all those issues. So basically what we did is we just shifted 100% that, we've got a team of, our business development team, is split between recruitment, and I handle most of the business retention and expansion. So we did is everybody, all hands on deck to focus on the local market. So the initial response, the initial approach was, let's talk to companies. What's going on? How are you preparing? So we did very well in that aspect. And I'm happy to report. And as we've seen that, a lot of our industries, at least our targeted industries, were very resilient and were able to adapt. You mentioned the hospitality industry. That one's tricky because of the social distancing and everything. They just couldn't make it work. Although those that could go online and, take to-go orders and all that. So kudos to them for being able to adapt. But for the most part, our manufacturing sector or, the professional services sector that could easily pivot to remote. So we were really focused on all those aspects, surveying, talking to companies and figuring out what were some of the immediate needs that they had, whether it was, access to PPE products. Then came the loans, the PPP program,
Right.
navigating. That one was kind of a little bit messy from the get-go, but as it went through, it started to align. So we really pivoted to taking care of the response and recovery of our local industries to shore them up, because that's the most important part of our economy. From the recruitment side, there was some delay, but quite honestly, it wasn't that much of a delay. Some projects still considered. You have to, I guess the thing to consider is on the recruitment side of things, they're usually a year to 2 years. I mean, they're extended out. So the first year is really trying to get all the due diligence, find the right real estate, look at, explore potential incentives. So we had time on our hands, time in our favor to look at those things. And really the doing Zoom and virtual really kept us going. So our ability to adapt the recruitment process to this was very helpful, even in doing some site visits. We'd get, the phone and kind of look, hey, this is the site. So it really, initially there was a bit of pause, but as things started to, kind of move along, we didn't see that much dip in terms of, companies that were pulling out or just canceling projects. Most of the projects that were going through, ended up, going through the entire process. So to recap, what we saw and where we pivoted was local response and recovery efforts. And then on the recruitment side, just embrace this whole virtual, Zoom world and really, like I said, the recruitment process did give us a bit of time to be able to work through the due diligence, the market research, and help those aspects to where now all those companies are now starting to do the site visits, or now are starting to come in. So
there's really only a delay of about a year. We sort of just kind of paused that kind of recruitment space.
Correct. But everything, we remained active with the marketing, and promoting and talking. And we did get a lot of RFIs. The state of Texas was still getting RFIs. So maybe not as many as in other years, but it was enough to keep everyone busy.
Sure. Now, Jacob,
it's good for San. It speaks well to about San Antonio as we stand as a location for new businesses. And then our local businesses, we had a few that actually were, continued their expansion plans. They're still, picking up people, still, building out their new facilities. So it was good to see that there was a brief pause. And I think the pause, if anything, was about getting, the employee safety was number one.
Right.
making sure that they had the right, processes and everything to keep everybody safe. So if anything, that's kind of where there was that pause and just kind of figuring out, okay, how do we get enough of, sanitizer, masks, face shields, all that, all those things. So it was, and then I guess on the other side of it, and David worked a lot the county did a lot with companies that pivoted, that were in the manufacturing, that they did, automotive parts, and all of a sudden they're starting to do PPE. So that was a great, that again speaks to the culture and the businesses that we have here in San Antonio. So it was a team effort that helped push everything through and get us here to where we are. So that momentum wasn't lost. It
was really remarkable to see sort of the small business community and startup community kind of really pivot in that particular point. I mean, you made a great point about how, if we many of the companies that were in the manufacturing space kind of shifted then to PPE. We had distilleries shifting off and creating hand sanitizer. Jacob, I mean, you were sort of in the middle of it, right? You're a small business owner, you're developing your coffee business. March 2020 hits, April 2020 hits. How does the world look like to you when this experience starts a year ago?
Yes, and thank y'all so much for having me be a representative of the small business community in San Antonio. I'm honored to be that. I know there are many other people that can provide as much value, if not much more as well. But I think coming from my industry of food and beverage, it was a wild world. It was really like, we don't know what's going to happen. And fortunately for us, we're not in the brick and mortar restaurant industry. We don't have any physical spaces other than our manufacturing facility because we're in the consumer packaged goods business. So, our pivot looked a little bit different than most businesses, although it did change significantly, right? So we were mostly in the office service space for coffee products, and that was about 90% of our business. And when a pandemic hits and all of the people leave the offices, that's 90% of business gone. So then it's like looking at how do we pivot what we do, which is consumer packaged goods and coffee, to be successful in this sort of environment. And luckily we saw all of those same office people now flock to the grocery store, right? And that was his own calamity in a sense. Nobody knew what to do in the grocery store either. Are things safe? How do we keep things in stock? All of these certain things. Luckily, we were able to transition that 90% of business over to the grocery space, into a new business model that we wanted to get into in the future, but had to do absolutely immediately. And I think the ability to do that was in large part because of David and Roger's work through San Antonio and Bexar County of, okay, let's have the priority of keeping these businesses safe. Never in a million years did I think I would be in a line waiting for PPE supplies for my employees, in thousands of cars outside of the AT&T Center, just getting free supplies, right? And then 3 more rounds of that came to our office and we didn't even know it was coming. Just in our office door, it was, several masks, large gallons of hand sanitizer brewed by Ranger Creek down the street. It was great to see that, safety was the #1 priority. And then on top of that, the support of the community to say, okay, let's change these business models and then let's support it financially as well. We were one of the many who received funding from the grants of the city of San Antonio and Bexar County that were funded through the CARES Act. And I think they did a phenomenal job of getting those funds to the right places. There's been a large emphasis on the hospitality industry, the food and beverage industry, supporting those businesses that really couldn't do much other than just ensure the safety of their employees and remain resilient, right? I think it was in January of 2020, we were all focused on growth, and that growth switched to just resilience. And now I think we're finally coming back around to, okay, we've now developed these business models that are totally new to us. And a lot of the restaurants, right, they're moving into the world we're in of CPG and all these delivery models and things that they're not used to, that they didn't ever think they were going to get into. But now that they're supported safely by the city of San Antonio and Bexar County and financially, I think they're looking towards, okay, let's move from resiliency to growth once again.
Wow. So, so we're getting some really interesting perspectives, right? So David's sort of talking to the perspective of sort of supporting the ecosystem through the work that you've done, and Roger, you've done as well, sort of building that. Jacob, you're giving us this great perspective from a small business owner about like the reality, right? 90% of your business disappeared a year ago, and you had to figure out how to move it forward and how to shut the doors. You know, Bob, you and I are at Trinity University. We're faculty members. You're the dean of the College of the School of Business. You know, our product are students. Our product are those early stage, first career folks that are entering the workforce. Can you give us your perspective about what it was like as the dean of the School of Business? You've got a graduating class of students that are coming out with majors in business. You've got employers that are recruiting, that might be withdrawing or keeping those offers. What did the world look like from your perspective a year ago?
Yeah, quite different than it does today, Luis. You know, at first it's pretty scary. Pretty, as you know, our hallmark at Trinity University is accessibility of our faculty, hands-on learning, experiential learning, project-based learning. Seemed almost impossible to do, an impossible feat when we shifted to an all-Zoom classroom environment. But remarkably, and I would second what some of the other panelists have said about focusing on resiliency and sustainability for this program. Remarkably resilient faculty, remarkably resilient students. I was teaching a human resource management consulting course at the time, and our students do consulting projects for small nonprofits that don't have a full-time HR manager. And we thought all of a sudden, wow, you know, how are they going to meet with their clients? How are they going to be able to do the research on site that they need to do? But our students were creative, innovative. Our faculty came up to the plate and hit home runs every time. Not to say that working in a virtual world and teaching, I'm sure, Luis, you know from your courses, can be the communication requirements are much greater. The fatigue factor, the Zoom fatigue factor sets in, as we all know, and it creates its own stresses and strains that we didn't have before. It kind of substitutes for some of the things that we had. But at the university, I believe we did not miss a beat. I also believe that we're actually much stronger for it. We've learned new technologies. We've learned new modalities, new pedagogical ways to work with our students, to conduct meetings during office hours, conduct meetings to follow up. Place is not a factor anymore. We have students from all over the world participating in our classes. Our enrollment, that was the big issue. That was the big question. What was fall going to look like? And Louisa and I know that we came out with flying colors. We have essentially the same enrollment we had during the 2019-2020 year, and 21-22 is looking great as well. I would just add one thing, Luis.
Yes.
If I expand off the campus and I look around, it's really interesting to listen to David and Roger and Jacob talk about things from inside the business, from supporting businesses. As a consumer, I look around and it was, to me, really worrisome at first. Where I live on the north side, there's quite a few strip malls. There's a lot of small restaurants, shoemakers, tailors, shoe repair, believe it or not, shoe repair folks, computer repairs, very small firms. And it was worrisome to see empty strip malls.
Yeah.
I remember driving up along De Zavala Road and seeing one strip mall was totally empty. But kind of like the spring flowers, those stores have started to fill again. Customers are coming back. I see people eating outside on patios, and I know it's the same downtown as well, and in other parts of the city and the county. But little by little, just as kind of like after the big freeze, our plants are starting to pop up some leaves, starting to see some roots that had been long planted in the community, starting to rise up again. For me, this will be my last little story. for me, what really said to me, we're coming back and we're resilient, is I remember standing in line at my local HEB and at the beginning of the pandemic, and I think they're only letting, I don't know, 100, 200 people in at a time. You had to wear masks. You had to go down one aisle one way and back the other way. And I walked in there and I was so hungry for an HEB chocolate devil's food donut. And I looked and it was in a little bag with one of those twist ties on it. And I said, it really hit me. It really hit me that the pandemic's here and we have to adapt. I think somebody used that word earlier, and we're going to be doing things differently. Well, I'd say about 6 weeks ago, I walked into the same HEB, and remember those big cases they had with the Mexican sweetbread and the donuts and the different pastries? They're out again, and you can use your little tongs, pick one up, and put it in a bag. And that told me we're back. We're really back. When HEB says it's time to put out the donuts and the sweetbread, we know we're back. So, Luis, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Bob. David, you mentioned and Jacob mentioned just how important the programs the county ran to really ensure sort of the survivability of what was happening. It was a tremendous investment the county made in shifting those dollars and ensuring that businesses could continue to survive. And I know that as someone that works in the startup community and works with small businesses, we saw a tremendous kind of disruption that kind of led people into buckets, right? There were those companies, similar to what Jacob was saying, that not only survived, but are beginning to sort of thrive and take this opportunity, maybe shifted their manufacturing, found a new business model, began to get traction and kind of made it through. And there was a whole other group of businesses as well. And I don't want to diminish the impact, who closed their doors, businesses that have been around for decades that had to sort of shut down, people who lost their job, people who had, loss of family members. It really was this event that sort of exposed this great disparities, sort of showed companies that were being managed well, that were being sort of financed and led well, to continue to be led well and managed well, and those that were not as well managed not survive, as well as other sort of circumstances that corrected this. As to where we are today, and I kind of want to shift a little bit to where we are right now and what we're doing. David, what do you see the county continuing to do moving forward with what's happening right now and perhaps in the near future? Because you guys have made investments in helping and support small businesses and some of the programs that Jacob did, but you're also continuing huge programs like Tech Fuel, where you're providing a cash prize for these early stage tech startups to establish their home here in San Antonio. Can you tell us a little bit more about the kinds of things that the county is doing now and continuing to do moving forward?
Sure. Well, we were a big provider of kind of survival capital for businesses early on. And I think that may continue. There's still some businesses out there struggling. And again, I know it's the most overused word of the decade to say it's unprecedented, but I would take people back in time when, as you said, it was a little over a year ago. We did our first program back in late February, early March.
Wow.
We came out with our first $5 million, even before PPP, working with Lift Fund to get dollars out into the hands of small businesses. We wanted to focus on Main Street businesses who could not operate if someone was walking in. So if you were some form of professional where you could work from home or continue to deliver value remotely, we were trying not to include those. And I think what you learn is how interconnected these businesses are. So, you think about something as San Antonio as a quinceañera, and of course there's a venue and there's a caterer and there's a DJ, but then there's all the dressmakers and the tailors and the shoe salespeople and all of the florists, and it goes on and on and on. And so if you just suddenly decide no quinceañeras for 6 months, there's a whole range of mom and pop, small storefront Main Street businesses that were hurt and didn't have the resources. It didn't matter, and I know you didn't mean it this way. It didn't matter whether they were well run or not. Yeah. They could probably manage on their own for a month or 2 or 3, but now 6 or 9 or 12. It's that unpredictability. So I think now the look forward is to be a little more predictable. Clearly, with the new administration, there's a much more of a sense that things will operate in the normal way that we're used to. Federal grants with guidelines on how to use them and how not to use them, and accountability and all the things that are necessary in a bureaucracy to function properly so that we know what we can and can't do. The last round with CARES was a bit of, especially early on, it was the Wild West of funding. You know, we didn't know what we could use it on, and everyone had an idea. We focused on small businesses all along, and I think that will likely continue. Now, the challenge for the city and the county both is that the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, as I call it, has a ton of other sources of funding for small business. So whereas in the past, for example, let me use a better example. Now, under CARES, the county had to give money to the suburban cities for their COVID needs. We gave them about $9 million of the 80 that we received. So a pretty healthy chunk. We won't do that this time. We're receiving somewhere on the order of magnitude of $398 million over 2 years. And I can't spend that on this area. Can I spend it in the small business area when there are other dollars? So there's going to be a lot of money chasing similar opportunities. So we're going to have to be very collaborative and thoughtful. And I think that's where the opportunities lie right now as we're waiting for the funding, is to sort of look at the area of small business. And the county, of course, is meeting all other needs, but we're talking here about that particular ecosystem of small business. And how do we collaboratively work with the city, the state, the small business administration? How do we ensure equity? Again, remember during the period of COVID, we also had the Black Lives Matter movement. We had the freeze. We had a range of other major social turmoil and things going on. And all of that collectively is informing what we want to do going forward, to focus on those who were most affected, to shore up those deficiencies that that presented themselves to us. We weren't even looking for them. You see the digital divide. Of course, it's a long-standing known issue, but today it's now survival. You know, we can't do the things we want to do effectively without resolving those issues. So there's a lot to work on going forward. Yes, tech fuel is important. One more quick point on that. You know, all of these changes we're talking about, work from home. Well, if the historical model of economic development depends on job generation for local people to get a job, and a company can create jobs and employ people anywhere, then how do we track effectiveness in terms of who gets employed and whether or not we should invest in it? And how is the remuneration working? What salary should we expect? All of those things are now in play. And we're going to be spending quite a bit of time trying to understand what it does to our economic development policies and programs and incentives.
You've given me a lot here. And so I want to pull two things out of what you said, David. The first is, you know, no conversation about adaptability or resiliency or sustainability here in San Antonio can be said without, and I want to emphasize one of the things you said, this aspect of collaboration, right? I mean, San Antonio, I've never done business in another community like it, right? I mean, it's so incredibly collaborative. People know each other, they work together. You know, you mentioned the tremendous work that Lift Fund has been doing during the course of this pandemic, how they're working together. I'm thrilled to be associated with them in the Helm Accelerator, where we're working with 40 small businesses right now and helping them get them to the next stage. Thankfully funded through USAA. It's thrilling to see the kind of work that Launch SA has been doing, or that you had local philanthropy come in town, right? And establish community labs, the great work that Graham Weston did to ensure that a nonprofit would be established to ensure that COVID testing could take place and people could send their kids to school, people could go back to work. It really was a tremendous collaborative effort to kind of come together and make that work happen. You know, Roger, in the work that you do, you're kind of in the middle of collaboration, right? I mean, you're kind of trying to bring all of these stakeholders together. You're looking at building and promoting the sort of region and making that move forward. From the perspective of the work that you're doing today and moving forward, like, what is it that you're currently doing or will be taking on quite soon? We understand from the news, there's a brand new strategic plan that's just been announced. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about that and the efforts that you're looking and how COVID has shaped that.
Sure. No problem. And really, you know, the EDF, the Economic Development Foundation, has always been highly collaborative. Yeah. You know, city, county, CPS. Always. So we've always had that. So this, you know, the implementation of this regional economic strategy is really to tighten up, to be able to scale up the efforts on recruitment and our local business expansion. So that's really what we're focusing on. We've always worked with our regional partners, the Seguins, the Shirts, but here we're really talking about one region, one purpose, because what's good for San Antonio is good for Shirts and vice versa, and Seguin and all those communities. So that's really what the strategy is about. And that's where we are taking our strengths as being the master convener and being excellent and collaborating together and really just focusing on scaling it up to take San Antonio to that next level, where we start getting, additional recruitment and really have a system to support our local businesses. And I think that's one thing that this whole COVID situation, and to David's point about really focusing in on small business, local business, has been that there's one thing to provide the grants and loans and things of that sort. And really my work in the business retention and expansion effort is really to, not only is it to try to help companies solve problems and give them access to resources, but it's to gather intelligence, to figure out, okay, what are your pain points? What are your struggles? What are your challenges? And be able to take that back to the collaboration and look at, hey, city, county, these are the areas where companies are struggling the most. It's workforce, it's this or that, because at some point, you've got the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is going to be the entrepreneur. And our role is really to help have those tools to help them do that. We can provide loans and grants, all day long, but if they're not used efficiently, effectively, and really focused on growth, then it's just money comes in and money goes out, and that doesn't facilitate the growth that we're looking for. Again, to David's point, economic development, it's about the jobs, it's about retaining those jobs. It's about growing the jobs. So the efforts that we're focused on is this regional approach that, like I said, one region, one purpose, and really utilizing all the assets we have in the region, because together we can accomplish a lot more than each of us, individually. So that's really where EDF is focused on. On my side and the business retention side, for example, Jacob is the perfect kind of company that I want to talk to, because he said one.
Well, we can set that up
growth.
right afterwards, because
He said growth, and those are the types of companies that, especially now, that are, you've got an appetite to growth, you've got the capacity to grow, you've got a great product, and you just need something extra to help you get to that next level. So those are the types of things that we're keeping an eye on, and being able to, through our collaborations with the chambers, with our, manufacturers associations and other groups that are in San Antonio, we have enough resources, and our role is to really just convene it into, one stop and be able to, execute on helping our local industries grow. So that's where EDF is focused on, is that one region, one purpose, and it's scaling up. We've had some strong fundamentals, the last few years, and it's really about, scaling up to be able to do some bigger and better things that would impact wages, that would impact the skills needed, and that ripple effect that David talked to. That's kind of the economic development ripple that we see, because jobs are changing. You've got manufacturing, it's got more automation. Might be less production line workers, but it requires a different type of skill to work on robots, to work on those things. Then you've got the tech stuff. Then now with more people relying on technology to sell their products, Zoom, Uber, all those sorts of things have a significant impact to changes to business models. So we're, to your point, we're stuck in the middle and trying to navigate all these things and really make sense of all that, to be able to be that resource for our local businesses.
So Jacob, we've been talking about collaboration, and clearly, you've been a person doing work in this ecosystem, right? You've seen collaborations, and you've worked with the Maestro Center. They're one of the places that I believe you spent some time with. You've engaged with a number of stakeholders. What does the work that you're doing now look like today and moving forward? What does the future look like for you as we're getting out of this period?
I think for us, it's a return to normalcy. I'll say as normal as possible, right? But I think, getting back into those office accounts, building back up that more profitable model for us, and kind of our core competency, right? That's what we did well. And the consumer packaged goods on the grocery store shelves in Central Market, it's been fun, it's been great, and it was kind of like what we were planning on doing 5 years ahead, and now we're doing it now, and getting that support from the Economic Development Foundation and the Maestro Center and all these places that have those mentorship and advisory capabilities helped us to change and adapt our business models and our kind of profit structures. So you mentioned one thing about a lot of businesses kind of not knowing what to do at the beginning of the pandemic. And then, it's very unfortunate, the many that we've lost throughout this. And I think it did for us, and I think it's done for a lot of people. It exposed kind of our complacency in business models in a way that we weren't thinking necessarily in terms of growth, right? We were just thinking resilience pre-pandemic, which is great. We were doing fantastic. Our economy was doing well locally. But I think once the pandemic hit, it was like, okay, this is what maybe the future looks like. Things get more virtual. People aren't going out as much. They're eating more inside. They're wanting innovative products, at least in the food and beverage industry, that make their lives more convenient because they are faster paced people. They're not living the same lifestyle anymore. And I think for us, luckily, because we were supported by the city of San Antonio and Bexar County, it allowed us the ability to say, okay, how do we pivot to be more like that? What if the world were to, eliminate the office space for eternity? Does that wipe out our business model? If it does, then we need to think about how we're going to change that. And I think that's where, again, the transition from resiliency to growth comes in at, okay, in January, February of 2020, we were saying, how do we make it to January or February of 2021? And then once we make it there, then how do we grow to, January, February of 2025, 2026? Because obviously now we know what can happen in the world. A lot of us didn't expect this, especially young entrepreneurs like myself and my colleagues. We have never lived through a pandemic. We've barely lived through a financial recession, right? We weren't old enough to have any money through it. So now it's saying, okay, we've got a little bit of sand in our boots. We know what it feels like to be uncomfortable. How do we make it past any sort of difficult situation? And I think, the city's done a great job of helping us. There's still a lot more work to do, but I think now it's focusing on how do we grow our businesses to be able to weather any storm, whether that be a freeze, a pandemic, social unrest, anything.
But Jacob, I want to, I'll get to you to David just a little bit. David, go ahead and speak up. I'll ask Jacob later.
Just a quick point on what Jacob is saying, Luis. I think we've had business support programs for a long time.
Yeah.
And maybe on the entrepreneur side, it didn't feel so tangible like it does now. And perhaps on the provider side, it was difficult to put a box around it and say, here's why you need to learn what we're teaching you, how to be adaptable or to pivot or whatever it may be. So again, it's a benefit of the pandemic. I'm pleased to hear that Jacob went through Maestro. We did provide them with quite a bit of funding, along with the San Antonians for Growth on the East Side had a similar program. And the programs that you run, of course, Luis, I mean, they're all of those are critical. But my point is just that the pandemic, I think, will help to improve both the customer and the provider.
Oh, I think it's been amazing in that kind of way. I mean, when you look at the resiliency of the companies that have managed to survive and are now in the position to hopefully thrive, or at least continue to look at what that next year looks like, or that batch of companies for which they had a booming 2020, right? Like business just took off because it was virtual, and we had to now increase our footprint 2x and 3x because we are all virtual, or we're servicing that sector. I mean, Jacob, you did something really remarkable over the last 12 months, and I don't want to diminish it. I actually want to sort of celebrate something remarkable that you did. A year ago, you had no product in any retail store. Where are you today with regards to your product placement and the channels you're selling in?
Yes. So in the beginning of 2020, we were kind of had a 1 to 2 year plan to be able to get into grocery stores. And, for a food and beverage business, the scalability comes with either more physical locations or your product in more places. So higher velocity of product or higher distribution, right? And we always knew that's where kind of our end goal was to get products onto grocery stores so we could expand, our mission, which is the love of craft coffee, as far and as wide as we could. That being not just in San Antonio business kitchens and things like that. And halfway through the pandemic, we're kind of sitting on our hands, not knowing what to do. And we just kind of all rallied ourselves up to say, hey, let's pinch to Central Market, H-E-B again, and let's just see what happens. I mean, it's our last ditch effort, right? We're counting down the months to the cash balance being zero in the bank account. We got to do it. And if it blows us out tomorrow and we get the opportunity, then let's go ahead for it, because that's kind of where we're at anyway. And we pitched to Central Market, sent samples virtually, right? Never met the buyer, but fortunately we were given the opportunity to go on shelves. And I think that's not only speaks to the food community's resilience and kind of interconnectivity, but also that of Texas as well. Just saying, okay, let's take a shot on these smaller companies that need to change and need to, accelerate what they were going to be doing 5-6 years from now to now, because that's the reality. And I think you saw a lot of that with H-E-B specifically having a great partnership with local restaurants, right? Like I think it was Los Barrios had their meals prepared in to-go containers, and it shifted from H-E-B branded Meal Simple in those, now ever-growing grab-and-go sections of the H-E-B when you walk in the front door, to being local food products, which I think is something that's, just speaks to the culture of San Antonio, the culture of Texas, its roots in supporting small local business. And specifically within the food industry, that was something that was really hurt at the beginning of the pandemic. So now, right, like we went from 90% of our business being in the business office service space to now 90% of it being in grocery. And we have some pretty exciting things coming up with H-E-B proper, not just Central Market. So we're excited to announce that hopefully in fall, when everything comes back to, I say normal, right? But the new normal, whatever we're at this point. But I think because we were supported by San Antonio and Bexar County and Texas so well, we're able to make that transition. And I think that a lot of companies now, like us, are looking at, okay, how do we do that? How do we shift from, I'm friends with a lot of brewery owners here in town. For the past 6-9 months, none of them have had their doors open, and some of them are saying, even though we have the ability to open with nearly full capacity, at this point we're looking at, if we're going to grow our brands to be big brands to represent San Antonio, we wouldn't just be a 3,000 square foot brewery in the heart of South San Antonio, right? That doesn't grow a brand, that doesn't grow San Antonio outside of itself. They're saying, okay, how do we leverage opportunities like getting on H-E-B grocery store shelves, and then using that success to make a model for Whole Foods and Wegmans and all of these other different grocery chains and other channels of business that grow San Antonio and San Antonio brands outside of this great space and to even greater spaces in the United States.
Hey, Louis, if you're saying that they did the retail over the last year, I'm looking at their website and I see 19 outlets in 5 or 6 cities. So that's very impressive. Very impressive.
It's been incredibly impressive to know that, Jacob, who started his business as an undergraduate student here at Trinity, literally selling coffee out of his backpack, is now statewide in Central Market, is throughout San Antonio at H-E-B, is in markets throughout the state. I mean, it's really been a remarkable story of an example of the many entrepreneurs here in town who have built their business, have collaborated, have sort of come in, this aspect of resiliency in working together to really sort of have an opportunity. And while some of us are a little bit older than Jacob, where we remember maybe some previous downturns, to have that experience hopefully close to being behind them, right, with what looks like a bright Q3 and Q4 of 2021, what looks like it's going to be a rip-roaring 2022, bodes well for, I think, the region, and bodes well, I think, for the businesses that are here. Yeah, Roger.
If I could add just one quick thing, kudos to you, Jacob. It sounds like your company is great, and I look forward to having an offline chat with you. But I just wanted to throw in one last thing. When you're ready to go international, come talk to us, because we're about to launch a cohort to try to get them into Mexico and Latin America. So that's another additional resource that's available through the Economic Development Foundation and our Export Leaders Program. So when you're ready to do that, hit us up.
And that's something, and Roger, that's something that you do not just for food and beverage, right? You've got this long-standing sort of export program.
Correct. Yeah.
That manufacturers and entrepreneurs here in San Antonio out in other countries.
Yep, exactly. And to the point of the food and beverage, San Antonio's got a pretty strong foothold in food and beverage, you know, so we've got some strong companies, national distribution, and a lot of the interest that we have from companies is in that industry. So there's a lot of channels there, but yeah, definitely on the international side, we can shore up and support in that manner, in that area as well.
Yeah, Bob, I mean, you spend a lot of time with business advisory board members who are enterprise employers here in San Antonio. You work deeply with sort of that larger established business. From your perspective, what are those stakeholders telling you about what the future holds and what things look like moving forward?
Yeah, similarly to what we were discussing earlier, I think there was kind of a freeze, a panic at first in terms of what need to be done. I believe that what we're going to see, according to the members of our Business Advisory Council, is a continued emphasis at working at home, shared office spaces in the larger companies, especially in financial services sector, banking sector, and the like. I know USAA has their employees are coming back, but they've scaled down pretty much on some of their plans. We've got some representatives from there. Our representative from Valero tells us they're back pretty much full speed on site, working on their campus on the north side here, out by 1604. And you know, we've also got other people that are in the automotive industry, direct sales and the like. That's a business that, as much as I think we try to sell cars online, I think selling high ticket items is going to be more difficult. And so those folks are still hiring, still working face to face in their places. So while there was some hesitancy and ambiguity about how things were going to come along for some of the larger companies, I think things are starting to flatten out now in terms of what we're doing as people come back to work, maybe in smaller numbers or in rotational numbers over time. The other thing that's interesting to me is I had mentioned before this human resource management consulting course that we have. And one of the organizations that's participating, and our students are working on a consulting project for, was totally in person before. Very small organization, maybe eight people, based here in San Antonio. But since the pandemic started and they started to work virtually, they've dispersed. Most of them are some are in San Antonio. And I go back to what I think Roger was talking about earlier. Or maybe it was David. How do we gauge the benefits of things that we're doing, the initiatives, the incentives, the projects that we have? And I'd love to hear some more from them about what they're thinking about. But this particular organization is not coming back. They're going to have a very small office, maybe 2 or 3 rooms in it, where people can come, clients, where some of the staff can come if they need to meet. But essentially, they're going to continue in a virtual world, and they're adjusting their policies and procedures to do that. So I'd be interested to hear what others are hearing about sort of blended workplace, potentially virtual, partially virtual, partial in person, and what the prospects are for that down the line.
Yeah. So David, I'm curious. Yeah, please jump in.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone knows yet, Bob, but I think we're clearly going to see that even at the county for our workforce, which will obviously be here, but working from home as a normal part of the work week will be normal. So the other side of that is you could live in San Antonio and work anywhere in the world. So economic development has been about talent for the last probably 5 to 7 years. It's really a chase for talent. That's why companies find Austin so attractive, because there's a wealth of talent there. And then the wealth of talent begets the jobs, and the jobs beget the talent. So it turns into that virtuous cycle. That maybe changes a bit, right? Maybe the companies may be based in California or Tokyo or wherever, but people could work here. So could we come up with incentives that incent the high value talent that you want to live here and work anywhere they want? There have been communities that have tried that in the U.S. By providing mortgage assistance or even a bonus if you come live in our city for 2 or 3 years. These cities that are shedding people, where San Antonio, as we all know, is a fast growing importer of people and talent, in addition to the resident local population. So those, I think that is where we're going to look to places like Trinity University to do that kind of research. I just don't think we know. Everything else has been disrupted. So why not the talent equation and the economic development equation? It's disrupted, and I don't think we yet know what will happen, but it'll clearly be different.
Yeah, Roger?
No, I'd have to agree with David. I mean, we're keeping an eye on it. We haven't seen any major shifts from, at least on the recruitment side, of companies really saying that they're doing that. So we're keeping an eye on it. On the local front, it seems that a lot of the companies that we're talking to, of course, there are exceptions. Of course, manufacturing, you can't do that remote. You can't send a machine to somebody's house for them to make the widgets, right? But on the professional service, like the USAAs of the world, those, what we're hearing a lot more is transitional hybrid models, because one of the things that came out is that productivity, it's been, if not good or better for a lot of these companies. So they're really, and of course, corporations are all about productivity, getting the most that they can out of what they do. So what impact is it going to have? We still, to David's point, it's still a bit uncertain, but from what we're seeing on the project side, and it may just be a shift, maybe, because we're centrally located, because we've got, Texas fame and those sorts, that maybe manufacturing is going to really boom. And the last, 2019, 2020, the majority of the recruitment projects were primarily manufacturing. So, so that may be, those are dynamics that might be changing, where versus you've got the Austin that has the tech, the more office type, virtual, those sorts of things. So really, it's still a little bit unknown. But what we do know is that people, I guess what's piqued the interest of companies is being able to be productive in a remote environment. So, but to the citizens, to David's point about, living in San Antonio, but working for a company outside, I mean, there's still that impact to the restaurants, to, the coffee drinkers. And, so there's still, that's the other side of it, and if they're getting, if they make the wages in, California wages and spending in San Antonio, even better, that's a good boom for the housing market, I don't think they'll look at it that way, but, but those aspects also come into play.
But it also points light on how important placemaking is, right? How important it is to make San Antonio the place you want to recruit talent, why San Antonio is the kind of place you want to have workers or move your business, which is why, the investment that the city has made through the bond and new training, the kind of investments that we're seeing across the region with regards to supporting sort of train to work programs or internship programs like San Antonio Economic Development Foundation, sort of Work SA for high school students, or the very successful Student Plus Startups program focused on collegiate talent in downtown. The kind of placemaking that you're seeing around downtown is so critically important.
Yeah, and actually you bring up excellent points on two things I forgot to mention as we look at what the regional economic strategy and what EDF is doing, and it really focuses on those two things, people and place. Yeah. Those are the two specific drivers that we're looking at as we move forward, and the strategies and everything else that we're trying to do on the workforce front, incentive front, recruitment, expansion, all those things come down to those two things, people and place.
It's really been remarkable. This has been a wonderful conversation. Trinity University was brought to San Antonio at the invitation of the Chamber of Commerce in 1941 to help the economic development of this region. And we've been a part of this community for well over 75 years. producing outstanding talent that's gone on and worked here in the area, amazing entrepreneurs and founders like Jacob, who've gone off and established their businesses and worked here. And this small webinar is a small example of how our commitment to San Antonio and the region is reflected in our thought leadership. It's been wonderful having you as part of this conversation about sort of exploring these issues of resiliency and sustainability. We touched on how important collaboration is in making that sort of resiliency happen, the importance of sort of programs and support that were happened and supported not only by people by the county, but also sort of groups like Lift Fund and other organizations that were here. Jacob spoke really well about how important communities were in coming together and supporting each other in the work that we've done. It's been a tremendous honor to be working and talking with you all here for this conversation. It's hard to believe that the hour is past. I'd like to remind our readers that are our watchers that are here watching us live to please tune in on the Tiger Network on Monday, April the 19th for Trinity University's 2021 Louis H. Stumberg Venture Competition. This new venture competition is Trinity's opportunity to help launch real ventures by students. Jacob was a participant as part of that program. And so 10 of our teams will be competing for 5 spots in our seed fund accelerator and our seed fund, where each one receiving an investment of $5,000. If you're watching this asynchronously, that program will also be available on Trinity University's YouTube channel. On behalf of Trinity University, David, I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this conversation. Roger, for representing San Antonio Economic Development Foundation as part of this conversation. Jacob, representing the small business group here with QuickSip Coffee. My tremendous colleague and partner in crime, Bob Scherer, Dean of the School of Business. Thank you all so much for your attention, and thank you so much for watching us today.